One of the problems, as you know from education in every country, is that it is dominated by what I would call a lot of slogans and buzzwords. And these don't vary from country to country. I mean, every country talks about the knowledge economy, the great opportunity, educating young people, skill development, excellence. And in this knowledge economy, you can't expect to get growth if you're not doing enough, both in the area of education and skill development and so on. And it would not surprise you that we're saying all the same things. The real issue is, I think, what are the difficult issues in what otherwise very often can be described as non-controversial motherhood statements, which are universally adhered to. Don't get me wrong, I'm not denigrating motherhood statements, and most motherhood statements, that's why they're called motherhood. I mean, they're good statements, they're very important statements, but for someone wanting to get to the nub of the matter, everybody agrees on those statements. The question really is, are we doing some of the difficult things that would actually move it forward? I think we're trying to, and that's what I want to give you a sense of. First, some very broad parameters. Government in India means central government and state governments. Most people, when they think of universities in India, and the fact that some of these universities have established a very high reputation for themselves, both in the country and actually also abroad, usually think of central government institutions, central universities. I mean, for example, anyone talking about India's technical education talks about the IITs. Now, there are some very good technical schools other than the IITs, but it's dominated by the IITs. So the first question that arises is, what is the relative importance of the central institutions versus state institutions? And here, 97% of all students at university are either in the private sector or in the state sector. Only 3% are really in the central government sector. That's a very good level of quality, and actually we need to improve that even further. But let's give you one very important point. If someone here is interested in collaborating, there are three types of institutions that can be used for collaboration. One is central universities, the other is state universities, some of which are good, many are not so good. And of course there's the private sector, again, some of which are good and some are not so good. So that's one big distinction that has to be made. What we've said in the plan, and I think that's government policy also, that we're really pushing in two different directions, both of which are valid. One is that the number of kids that go to university should be increased. And that's not necessarily directly connected with employable skills. I mean, there's a certain merit in having an entire generation, having a larger percentage of them go through what would in America be called a liberal arts education. That has some value. Of course, there's not much use if you don't produce the technical skills and the engineering skills and the medical skills and the professional skills. But that's maybe the easiest thing to do in some ways, but we also need to ensure that the composition of what people are being trained for changes quite a bit. Separate from university education, completely separate from it, is the whole business of skill development, where essentially people are trained for employable skills. So we have a set of programs aimed at strengthening the existing technical training institutions, which were hopelessly outmoded, but which are now slowly being changed around. How effective these changes are is an important issue. Our overall policy on education, I don't know if Palam Raju mentioned this, he may have, is kind of driven by what we call the 3 E's. Did he mention the 3 E's? He didn't, so let me elaborate on that. Because I think it's a conceptual kind of categorization. The three E's are really expansion, equity, and excellence. Expansion simply says, at the moment we have, numbers vary on this, but somewhere between 14 and 18% of the generation that could be in university is actually in university. And everybody feels this is too low, and that over a 20-year period or something, this should go up. Some people think it would be okay to take it up to about 25, and others say, no, we should go for 30. It's certainly true that in developed countries, the percentage has become very high. In developing countries, also rising. That is straight expansion. Now, we can expand the system with all its good and bad qualities simply by having more of each, and we are going to do that. There will be more private sector universities, there will be more central universities, there will be more state sector universities. So the expansion side of the operation is underway and is not actually going to create, if you check back, we'll be able to meet those targets, I'm pretty sure. Equity is a little more complicated because it's quite possible to expand top down. I mean, you got, 19% of the kids are in university. This is usually highly correlated with their position in the income level, and the upper income people tend to go to universities. So you can expand the thing by taking the next level of income. But that's not what we're calling equity. I mean, two reasons for that. One is the expansion can take place in the areas that are already developed. Whereas we want to see that expansion taking place in areas which currently don't have colleges. And actually, if you want to educate women, which you do want to educate, it's extremely important that the availability of university and college education is spread over the regions. I mean, for one reason or another, and one can imagine why, people don't want to send their daughters too far away from home. The young men can still be sort of carted off, even they prefer to be nearer home. But as far as daughters are concerned, if there aren't nearby colleges, the danger is they won't go to university. Not everybody, but certainly not at the 30% population. So you need institutions where there aren't any. And I think how to achieve that is a very major part of the equity challenge. The other side of the equity challenge, of course, is that even where there are educational institutions, are the poor denied access to them. And there, from a monetary point of view, is very easy because most of our university fees are very low. And we ought to have, we do have, and we will have even more scholarships. But scholarships don't solve the problem of regional spread. Remember, this is a very large country. So that, the equity side of education involves spreading it out into areas where it doesn't exist. And the last, of course, is excellence, which is actually the most difficult. Because even the spreading is simply a matter of money, though it is not so easy to recruit faculty if you start spreading the educational institution to areas that are not, from a geographical point of view, very attractive. I mean, people who are qualified to be good university teachers also have expectations not only about the sort of general living conditions, that can be achieved by simply ensuring that they have it. But the cultural aspects, good schools for their children, and that cannot be assured. So I think the business of spreading and how you spread it requires a lot of innovative thinking. Excellence, of course, to some extent actually conflicts with the expansion side. I mean, it conflicts with expansion in simply in the sense that you can't maintain certain standards if you're expanding rapidly. At least you can't do that very quickly. And it conflicts big time with the regional spread, because as you start wanting to get professors in parts of the country which are not otherwise well developed, what's going to happen is you're not going to get the best professors. You're not even going to get the good ones. So these are the challenges. It's not, I mean, we recognize them and we really need to address them. I just want to say one more thing. Well, I just mentioned two things in connection with excellence. One is, of course, that the basic policy essentially says that private universities are welcome to come in and expand, and they are expanding to different degrees in different parts of the country. The difference really is that, by definition, a private university here is not a university that's going to get state aid, whereas government universities, whether center or state, are going to get state aid. So this has the consequence that private sector fees will have to be much higher in order to support whatever educational level the institution provides. And that is a little creates some difficulties, because on the part of the student, the expectation is that there are public universities and private universities, so why do private universities charge so much when the public universities don't? And when you translate that into a political perception, that automatically leads to the desire to control student fees. And every state actually requires you to get your fees approved. Now, one of the problems with approved is that in the Indian setup, no educational institution is meant to be a profit activity. Nothing wrong with that. I mean, Harvard is not a profit activity. So the basic idea is you can be private, but it's not meant to be a dividend-paying kind of operation. There are in the United States corporate universities. I think Emory, for example, is a corporate university. Harvard is not. But we are into the non-profit on the education front. But when you say non-profit, I mean, the theory is that they should be allowed to charge whatever fees they like to cover costs. But inevitably, an element of normative assessment of whether the costs are reasonable creeps in. So, I mean, if you want to produce a first-rate university and have an Olympic-sized swimming pool, because it is your intention to develop the kind of athletes who can get to that level, or to have a laboratory that is really state-of-the-art, is going to cost a lot of money. And translating that into fees, even if you found that students are willing to pay the fees, and this is the dilemma, because students are willing to go to Harvard and pay $50,000 a year. It's probably gone up since I last checked, but as a person goes off to Harvard to pay $50,000 a year for 4 years. But in the domestic setup, if somebody were to get up and say, what's the big deal in Harvard? I can actually produce a private university, bring back a lot of Indians or non-Indians to teach in the university, and we would actually do it at a much lower cost, but we have to charge a fee. If you were a state university, that fee would have to be approved by somebody, some panel. And while they do allow much higher fees than in the private sector, whether they will cover the fees needed if you want to achieve real excellence, it becomes an open question. Now, the good news about all this is that we don't have to resolve these problems today, tomorrow, or even next year. I think the good news is we should be very aware of these problems. And then normally in any government system, what happens is that the worst tragedy is when you're not aware of the problem. Because then everybody just goes around saying, this is what I want to do, these are my institutions, why they're not achieving it. I think the next step is you're aware of the problem, but you can't necessarily solve the problem without the cooperation of very, very many participants. And I want to close actually with a comment that, you think of economic reform, and similarly you might think of educational reform. But one of the biggest impediments to educational reform is educational faculty. I mean, the idea that educational faculty is raring for reform is simply not true. So unlike elsewhere, there are multiple stakeholders. There's a public that has this schizophrenic perception that we need high quality education. We are allowing our students who can afford it to go abroad, but there's very little public support for creating institutions that will be able to pay the sort of costs that they would have to incur. I don't think there's any likelihood that the government cannot be subsidizing private institutions. So you will always have a conflict that university fees in the government sector will be very low. This is, by the way, not unusual. I mean, even in the United States, if you go to a state university. But I think in the United States, maybe the ratio is 1:3. Here, the ratio is maybe 1:30. So I think that's the difference that one has to tackle. And I think in this context, we believe that one of the very important things that universities can and should be encouraged to do is to build global partnerships. So actually, any Indian university is completely free to enter into any agreement with another university which it believes is good for itself. I mean, if there's a foreign university that wants to send faculty to teach, want to send students to be enrolled, wants to do joint research, set up joint research centers, under the regulations of the university, all this is possible. Many of our universities are not actually aware that this is possible and therefore hesitate. But I think if you make a list of what universities are doing, it will be very clear that there is a lot of this kind of collaboration that is taking place. Personally, I think it's a very good idea. So those of you from abroad who are trying to link up with Indian universities would be well advised to take this as a statement of policy. What you can't do is to give a foreign university degree out of India. But any other sort of collaboration is certainly possible. I don't know if I've contradicted what people have been saying, but it's sort of, one of the roles of the Planning Commission is to subject our own policy to a very strong internal critique. So we are raising these issues, but I must say that we are raising them very much in the context of a recognition that these problems are going to get resolved only over a period of time. Even globally, the way European universities work is totally different from the way US universities work. Probably the only European country which is closer to the United States is the UK. And they've been making a lot of changes in their university system, introducing various types of flexibilities, etc. So there isn't actually a well-defined global standard. But I think we need to be clear that India's got to do all three of the three E's, and we're sure about the expansion, we're almost sure about the equity, but we're not so sure about the excellence. And really, it's there that creative thinking ought to be concentrated. Thank you.